Welcome to the Chronicles of the Realm, the channel where we tell the story after the dice are done rolling. So have you ever finished an epic campaign or an entertaining one shot and thought, that was an absolutely incredible story? I wish more people could experience what we just did. That is exactly why this channel exists, to tell those tales. I'm not just a game master, I'm a storyteller who's lived these adventures with friends around many tables. Now I'm bringing these stories to you. Every video here is a journey into a world we built together through extensive play. You hear about the cunning schemes, the heartbreaking sacrifices, the hilarious mishaps, and the legendary triumphs that emerged from our sessions. Whether it was a desperate heist in the gritty shadows of a frozen city, a horror mystery that frayed the ends of sanity, or a high fantasy saga that spanned multiple sessions, each story is born from real gameplay, real choices, and real dice rolls. The goal is to entertain you with tales of adventure, to share the crazy results that came about through interesting choices, and the great and the bad rolls. This will be a seamless telling of our game as it unfolded through the play. Like hearing a bard around the campfire telling of the daring do of an ancient legendary hero, the stories here will entertain. So if you love stories where the heroes aren't predetermined, the endings aren't guaranteed, and the magic lies in the collective imagination of the players, you've found your new home. Subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell, and let's explore these worlds together. Well, the next story is about to begin. Are you ready to listen?
The Obsidian Citadel. Part 1. The Gathering. The wind howled through Black Peak, low through Black Peak like the dying breath of some ancient god, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, something that made the townspeople lock their doors before sunset and whisper prayers to deities they'd half forgotten. Snow fell in lazy spirals from a sky the color of old bruises, settling on the slate roofs of buildings that had stood for 300 years, built by hands long since turned to dust. The frozen tankard sat at the edge of the town square, a squat building of dark timber and river stone that leaked amber light from its frost-rimed windows. Inside, the air was thick with pipe smoke and the smell of roasting meat, of spilled ale and unwashed bodies pressed close against the mountain cold. A fire roared in the massive hearth, casting dancing shadows across faces weathered by wind and worry. Lyra Shadowstep sat in the corner farthest from the fire, her back to the wall and her eyes on the door. Old habits. The wood elf's fingers drummed a silent rhythm on the scarred table before her, a nervous tell she'd never quite managed to break. Her leather armor was dark as midnight, worn soft in places where it had saved her life, and her twin daggers rested within easy reach beneath her cloak. She'd been in Blackpeak for 3 days, watching the flyer on the town board grow more weathered, wondering if anyone would actually answer the call. The door opened, admitting a gust of frigid air and a man who moved like he'd been born in the wilderness. Tall and lean, with dark hair pulled back from a face all sharp angles and watchful eyes, he carried a longbow across his back and wore the practical greens and browns of someone who understood that survival meant not being seen. A ranger, Lyra thought, recognizing the economy of movement, the way his gaze swept the room and cataloged every exit, every potential threat. Cale Ashbourne shook snow from his shoulders and made his way to the bar, his boots leaving wet prints on the wooden floor. The barkeep, a thick-necked man named Torvin, slid him an ale without being asked. "You hear about the Yeti?" Torvin's voice was low, meant only for Cale's ears. "Saw the flyer in Millhaven," Cale replied, taking a long drink. "Figured I'd see if it was real or just mountain folk getting spooked by shadows." "It's real enough." Torvin's face went pale beneath his beard. "Lost 6 people in the last month. Found what was left of young Petra Stonefist 2 weeks back. Whatever did that to her." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Had red eyes," the survivors say. "Glowing like coals in a forge." Before Cale could respond, the door crashed open again. This time, the cold wind brought with it a figure that made several patrons reach for weapons they weren't carrying. The orc had to duck to clear the doorframe, his massive shoulders nearly as wide as the opening itself. Green skin marked with ritual scars, tusks that jutted from his lower jaw, and eyes that held the kind of violence that came from a lifetime of proving yourself in a world that wanted you dead. Crag the Breaker surveyed the room with undisguised contempt, his hand resting on the haft of the enormous war axe strapped to his back. He wore armor that looked like it had been beaten from scrap metal and spite, and when he spoke, his voice was like gravel grinding against stone. Someone here hiring for Yeti work? The tavern had gone quiet. Lyra watched the orc with professional interest, noting the way he moved despite his size. Not graceful, but efficient, like a siege engine that had learned to walk. Kale had turned from the bar, his hand hovering near the hunting knife at his belt, though he made no move to draw it. "Aye," Torvin said, his voice carefully neutral. "Town council's offering 500 gold pieces, each, for anyone willing to track down what's been killing our people." 500. Crag's laugh was harsh. "Must be desperate." "We are." The new voice came from the stairs leading to the second floor. A woman descended, her robes the deep blue of a midnight sky, embroidered with silver thread that caught the firelight and seemed to move of its own accord. She was young, perhaps 30 winters, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes that held the peculiar intensity of someone who'd looked into places most people couldn't imagine. Morrigan Voss reached the bottom of the stairs and fixed Crag with a stare that would have made lesser men flinch. Desperate enough to hire an orc, apparently, though I suppose beggars can't be choosers. Crag's hand tightened on his axe, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Perhaps we might save the posturing for the actual monsters, yes?" The dwarf who emerged from a booth near the fire was broad as a barrel and half again as tall, his beard braided with silver rings that marked him as a cleric of the Stonefather. Thorgrim Ironstone wore chainmail that gleamed with recent polishing, and the warhammer at his belt bore runes that pulsed with a faint golden light. His face was weathered as old granite, but his eyes held a warmth that seemed at odds with the grim set of his jaw. "We're all here for the same reason," Thorgrim continued, moving to stand between Morrigan and Crag. "The town needs help. People are dying. Whatever our differences, surely we can set them aside long enough to do what's right." "What's right?" Morrigan's laugh was bitter. "How refreshingly naive." "Not naive, lass. Hopeful. There's a difference." The door opened one final time, and the last member of their unlikely company entered on a wave of cold air and quiet authority. The paladin was everything the stories promised. Tall and broad-shouldered, with golden hair and features that belonged on a temple statue. His armor was polished steel chased with gold, and the longsword at his hip bore the sunburst symbol of Solarius, the Dawn Lord. But it was his eyes that caught Lyra's attention, blue as summer sky, and filled with the kind of certainty that came from absolute faith. Aldrich Lightbringer removed his cloak and surveyed the assembled group with an expression that managed to be both approving and faintly disappointed, as if he'd hoped for better, but was prepared to work with what he had. "I am Aldrich Lightbringer, Paladin of the Dawn Lord," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the now silent tavern. "I have come in answer to Black Peak's call for aid. I see others have done the same." His gaze moved from face to face, lingering on Crag with barely concealed distaste. "Unusual company, but the Dawn Lord teaches that even the most unlikely souls may serve the light." "How generous of him," Lyra murmured, speaking for the first time. Her voice was soft, musical, with the faint accent of the deep forests. "And how generous of you to grace us with your presence, Holy One." Aldrich's eyes found her in the shadows, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, at finding a wood elf so far from her ancestral lands. All who fight against darkness are welcome in this company, regardless of their origins. "Wonderful," Kale said, his tone dry as old bones. "We're all very welcoming and tolerant. Can we get to the part where someone explains what we're actually dealing with?" Torvin cleared his throat. "Aye, that'd be Elder Grimshaw's job. He's waiting upstairs. Said to send you up once you'd all arrived." "All?" Morrigan's eyebrow arched. "How did he know there would be 6 of us?" "The old man knows things," Torvin said, and would say no more. They climbed the stairs in silence, an uneasy procession of strangers bound together by gold and circumstance. Lyra moved like a shadow, her footfalls silent on the creaking wood. Kale followed with the ranger's unconscious grace, while Crag's heavy tread made the entire staircase groan. Morrigan's robes whispered against the steps, and Thorgrim's armor clinked softly with each movement. Aldrich brought up the rear, his hand resting on his sword hilt, not threatening, but ready. The upper room was small and close, dominated by a table covered in maps and a figure who sat hunched in a high-backed chair. Elder Grimshaw was ancient, his face a topography of wrinkles, his eyes milky with cataracts. But when he spoke, his voice was strong and clear. 6, he said, nodding as if confirming something to himself. 6 to go into the mountains. 6 to face what waits in the dark. His blind eyes seemed to find each of them in turn. Though not all 6 will return, cheerful, Lyra muttered. Truth rarely is, child. Grimshaw gestured to the maps. Sit, listen, your lives may depend on what I tell you. They arranged themselves around the table. Aldrich and Thorgrim on one side, Morrigan and Kale on another, Lyra and Crag taking the remaining seats, with visible reluctance to be paired together. The maps showed the mountains in intricate detail, marked with symbols and notations in a spidery hand. The Yeti have lived in these mountains since before my grandfather's grandfather was born, Grimshaw began. Peaceful creatures, for the most part, kept to themselves in the high peaks, avoided human settlements. We had an understanding. We didn't hunt them. They didn't trouble us. For 300 years that understanding held. Until now, Kale said. Until 6 weeks ago. Grimshaw's finger, gnarled as an old root, tapped a point high on the map. A group of prospectors found something in the mountains. An old fortress, they said. Ancient beyond reckoning, built into the mountain itself. Black stone that seemed to drink the light. They were excited. Thought they'd found some lost dwarven hold. Maybe treasure. Thorgrim leaned forward, his expression troubled. What did they find? Death. Grimshaw's voice went flat. 3 of them never came back. The 2 who did, they weren't right. Kept talking about red eyes in the dark, about something waking up. One of them threw himself off the town wall 2 days later. The other drank himself to death within a week. And the Yeti, Morrigan asked? Started appearing the very next night. But these weren't the creatures we'd known. These had eyes like burning coals, and they hunted. Not for food, for sport, for slaughter. Grimshaw's hands trembled slightly. We've lost 16 people. Men, women, children. Found torn apart, scattered across the snow like broken dolls. The room was silent, save for the wind howling outside and the distant crackle of the fire below. You think something in that fortress is controlling them, Lyra said. It wasn't a question. I know it is. I know it is. Grimshaw pulled out another map, this one older, the parchment yellow and brittle. I've been doing research. This fortress, it's called the Obsidian Citadel. It was built over 1,000 years ago by a cult that worshipped something old and terrible. The Dwarven kingdoms destroyed the cult and sealed the fortress, buried it under avalanches and tried to erase it from memory. But the prospectors found it, Kale said, and opened it, and woke what slept inside. Grimshaw's blind eyes seemed to stare into distances none of them could see. A demon, ancient and hungry. It's using the Yeti as its hands, its weapons, and it won't stop with Black Peak. Once it's strong enough, once it's fed enough, it'll spread, Aldrich finished, his voice grim, like a plague across the mountains. Exactly, Grimshaw sat back. That's why we need you, not just to kill some Yeti, but to go to the source, to find the Obsidian Citadel and destroy whatever's inside before it's too late. And you're offering 500 gold pieces for this suicide mission? Crag's laugh was harsh. Should be 5,000. It's all we have, Grimshaw said simply. We're a small town. We've scraped together everything we can. If it's not enough, it's enough, Thorgrim interrupted, his voice firm. Some things are worth more than gold. Speak for yourself, Priest, Morrigan said. But there was no real heat in her words. She was studying the maps, her fingers tracing the route to the fortress. How long to reach this citadel? 3 days hard travel, if the weather holds. Longer if it doesn't. Grimshaw pulled out a leather pouch and set it on the table with a heavy clink. Here's half the payment, in advance. The rest when you return. If you return. Your confidence is inspiring, Lyra said. I'm too old for false hope, child. I'm giving you truth, The mountains are dangerous even without demon-possessed Yeti. There are owlbears in the high passes, ice drakes in the canyons, and a white dragon that's been seen near the northern peaks. Any one of those things could kill you. All of them together? He shrugged. But you're all that stands between Black Peak and annihilation. So I'm asking, begging, if I must. Will you help us? The 6 adventurers looked at each other, strangers bound by circumstance and gold, each weighing their own reasons for being here. Lyra thought of the debts she owed, the people she'd failed. Cale remembered the villages he'd seen destroyed by things that came down from the mountains. Crag felt the familiar hunger for battle, for proving himself against impossible odds. Morrigan saw an opportunity to test her power against something truly dangerous. Thorgrim heard the call of duty, of people in need, and Aldrich felt the burning certainty of his faith, the knowledge that this was why the Dawn Lord had set him on this path. I'm in, Aldrich said first, his voice ringing with conviction. Aye, Thorgrim agreed. The Stone Father teaches that we are our brother's keeper. I'll not abandon these people. Someone needs to keep you 2 idealists alive, Morrigan said with a slight smile. I suppose that's my job. I've killed worse than Yeti, Crag rumbled, and I could use the gold. Cale nodded slowly. I'm a tracker. If there's a trail to this fortress, I'll find it. All eyes turned to Lyra. The wood elf sat in shadow, her expression unreadable. Finally, she reached out and took a portion of the gold from the pouch. I'm in, she said quietly. But not for the gold. Not really. She looked up, meeting each of their gazes in turn. I'm in because if we don't stop this thing, it won't stay in the mountains. It'll spread, and I've seen what demons do to forests, to the wild places. I won't let that happen again. Grimshaw nodded, something like relief crossing his ancient face. Then may the gods watch over you all. You leave at first light. Torvin will provide supplies, food, rope, climbing gear, whatever you need. The town will give you everything we can. We'll need it, Cale said, studying the maps. This route goes through some of the most dangerous terrain in the range. There's no safe path to the Obsidian Citadel, Grimshaw said. That's rather the point. The cult built it in a place where no sane person would go. You'll have to cross the Widow's Bridge, a rope crossing over the Screaming Chasm. You'll pass through owlbear territory. And if the White Dragon decides you're a threat, he shrugged, well, at least it'll be quick. You really know how to sell an adventure, Morrigan said dryly. They spent the next hour going over the maps, planning their route, discussing supplies and strategy. It was awkward, stilted, 6 strangers trying to work together, each with their own methods and assumptions. Aldrich wanted to plan every detail, to have contingencies for contingencies. Crag just wanted to know where the enemy was so he could hit it. Morrigan kept suggesting magical solutions that made Thorgrim uncomfortable, while the dwarf's insistence on prayer and divine guidance made her roll her eyes. Cale tried to keep them focused on practical matters, food, water, shelter, while Lyra mostly stayed silent, watching and listening, learning the dynamics of this group she'd somehow become part of. By the time they descended back to the common room, night had fully fallen. The tavern was quieter now, the locals having retreated to their homes, leaving only a few hardy souls nursing ales by the fire. Torvin had prepared a meal, roasted venison, dark bread, and a thick stew that steamed in wooden bowls. They ate in silence at first, the weight of what they'd agreed to settling over them like a shroud. It was Thorgrim who finally broke the quiet. We should know each other, he said, setting down his spoon. If we're going to trust each other with our lives, we should at least know who we're trusting. What's to know? Crag said, around a mouthful of bread. We're all here for the gold. Some of us are here for more than that, Aldrich said stiffly. Of course you are, Paladin. You're here to smite evil and bring the light to dark places and all that noble horse shit. Crag grinned, showing his tusks. Me? I'm here because I like killing things and getting paid for it. At least I'm honest about it. There's no honor in... Aldrich. Gentlemen! Morrigan interrupted, her voice sharp. Perhaps we could save the philosophical debate for after we've survived the demon-possessed Yeti? Aldrich subsided, though his jaw was tight. Crag just laughed and went back to his food. I'll start, Lyra said quietly. All eyes turned to her. My name is Lyra Shadowstep. I'm from the Whisperwood, 300 miles south of here. I've been away from my people for 5 years now. I work as a scout, a guide, sometimes a thief when the money's right. I'm good at not being seen, good at getting into places I shouldn't be, and very good at getting out again. She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her bowl. I'm here because I owe a debt. To the wild places, to the green growing things. Demons corrupt everything they touch. I won't let that happen again. Again? Kale asked softly. Lyra's expression closed off. Another time, maybe. Your turn, Ranger. Kale nodded, accepting the deflection. Kale Ashbourne. No fancy titles, no grand heritage. I grew up in a village that doesn't exist anymore. Raiders came down from the mountains when I was 12. Killed everyone. I survived because I was out hunting. His voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes were distant. Spent the next 10 years learning to track, to hunt, to survive in the wild. Figured if I was good enough, I could stop what happened to my village from happening to others. Hasn't always worked out that way. But I keep trying. A noble goal, Aldrich said, and this time there was genuine respect in his voice. Not noble, just stubborn. KL took a drink of ale. I'm here because I'm good at finding things that don't want to be found, and because Grimshaw's right, if this demon spreads, a lot more villages are going to burn. Morrigan went next, her voice cool and measured. Morrigan Voss. I studied at the Arcane Academy in Silverspire for 8 years, specializing in elemental magic. Fire, ice, lightning. I left 3 years ago because I found their rules constraining. Since then, I've been traveling, taking contracts, expanding my knowledge. She smiled slightly. I'm here because fighting a demon sounds like an excellent test of my abilities, and because 500 gold pieces will fund my research for quite some time. Research into what? Thorgrim asked. The nature of magical energy, the boundaries between the material and immaterial, the question of whether power has an upper limit or if it's simply a matter of will and knowledge. She met his gaze steadily. I want to know how far magic can go, what it can really do. Dangerous questions, the dwarf said quietly. The only questions worth asking. Thorgrim sighed and introduced himself. Thorgrim, Ironstone, cleric of the Stonefather. I've served my god for 40 years, healing the sick, tending the wounded, fighting when I must. I'm here because it's my duty, not just to Blackpeak, but to all who suffer under the shadow of evil. The Stonefather teaches that we are all carved from the same mountain, all part of the same bedrock. When one suffers, we all suffer. When one falls, we all fall. He touched the warhammer at his belt. I'll do everything in my power to see that we all come back alive. Even the orc? Crag asked, his tone mocking. Even you, lad, even you. Crag stared at the dwarf for a long moment, then shrugged. Crag the Breaker. I'm from the Ironjaw clan, east of the Spine Mountains. Left when I was 16 because I got tired of the constant fighting, the endless proving myself, the clan politics and blood feuds. Figured the human lands would be different. He laughed bitterly. They weren't. Just a different kind of fighting. But at least here, when someone wants me dead, they're honest about it. He hefted his axe. I'm good at killing. Better than good. And I'm here because 500 gold pieces is 500 gold pieces. Don't expect anything more from me. We won't, Aldrich said coldly. Finally, the paladin introduced himself, though they all knew who he was. His reputation had preceded him. Aldrich Lightbringer, paladin of Solarius, the Dawn Lord. I have spent 15 years in service to the light, fighting darkness wherever I find it. I have battled undead in the crypts of Shadowmere, driven demons from the ruins of Old Carthus, and stood against the necromancer lords of the Blighted Wastes. His voice rang with conviction. I am here because it is my sacred duty to protect the innocent and destroy evil. The Dawn Lord has guided my steps to this place, and I will not fail in my purpose. Must be nice, Morrigan said, being so certain about everything. Faith provides certainty, Aldrich replied. Perhaps if you opened your heart to the divine... I'll pass, thanks. I prefer to rely on things I can actually prove exist. The divine is all around us, if you would only...
Can we not? Lyra interrupted. Please? We have 3 days of travel ahead of us, trapped together on narrow mountain paths. Let's not start the theological arguments before we've even left town.
Aldrich looked like he wanted to argue, but Thorgrim put a hand on his arm. The lass is right. We don't have to agree on everything. We just have to work together long enough to finish the job. Fine, Aldrich said stiffly. But when this is over, we're having a conversation about the state of your soul, mage. I'll look forward to it, Morrigan said with a smile that suggested she absolutely would not. They finished their meal in relative peace, the conversation turning to practical matters, watch rotations, marching order, what to do if they encountered hostiles. It was all very professional, very careful. They were strangers, and they knew it. Trust would have to be earned, if it could be earned at all. Lyra excused herself first, claiming she needed to check her equipment. In truth, she just needed air, needed space away from the weight of all those personalities crammed into one room. She stepped out into the night, into the cold and the snow, and breathed deep. The town was quiet, windows dark, smoke rising from chimneys in pale columns. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The mountains loomed all around, black shapes against a blacker sky, and Lyra felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came from being so far from the forest, from the green and growing things. Can't sleep either? She turned to find Kale standing in the doorway, his breath misting in the cold air. Just needed some quiet, she said. I know the feeling. He moved to stand beside her, his eyes on the mountains. Quite a group we've assembled. That's one word for it. You don't trust them. I don't trust anyone. Lyra glanced at him. Do you? Not yet, but I might, given time. The paladin's going to be a problem. The paladin, the orc, the mage who thinks she's smarter than everyone else? Lyra shook her head. We're a disaster waiting to happen. Maybe, or maybe we're exactly what we need to be. Lyra's smile was slight. Sometimes the best teams are the ones that shouldn't work. Forces everyone to be better than they are.
Oh, there you have it. The tavern, the party, the objectives, all of it lined up. Lots of NPCs to meet, the town to save. Looks like everything's lined up perfectly for this party to go out and handle some business. But do they all come back? That is indeed the question, and you'll have to stay tuned for future episodes. And I'm going to leave that blooper in there because this is real. No AI on this part. The intro and outro are all me. The middle is done by AI for now. Hopefully I can get some more time where I can actually start doing these myself. But we'll see how they go. And until then, like, comment, subscribe, let me know what you guys think, and I'll gladly incorporate some of that feedback into future videos. Thank you, and have a great evening, afternoon, morning, whatever time you're listening to this, and wherever you may be listening to this. Later.